Good morning. Kim Hammer, pastor of Saline Missionary Baptist Church down in Tull, your morning devotion from the book of Genesis chapter 3. And to my knowledge, the best I can tell, this is the first question that was ever asked in the Bible, the first question that was ever posed to humanity. And it was not between Adam and Eve, and it was not between God and his creation. Instead, it was from Satan, who came to drive a wedge between God's creation and the Creator God. And when Satan asked this question of Eve, he had a very specific intent. He wanted to draw Eve, subsequently Adam, away from God, in order that it might drive a wedge between the creation of God and the Creator, which is God. And so he asked her a question. And this question set the tone for the rest of humanity to have to deal with. And here was the question. The question was, you must not eat from the tree in the garden. And it was a pretty basic question. He started off by saying, did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden? That was just a question that set the tone for the rest of humanity, and here's why. First of all, he personalized it, and he directed it toward Eve, and he said, you. You know, whenever Satan comes and asks me a question, generally it's directed toward me personally. And it's like a one-on-one conversation is going on, where maybe I'm not answering, but he's trying to get in my head, and through that question, he's trying to achieve the ultimate goal, which is to drive a wedge between me and God. Now, a long time ago, I accepted Christ as my Savior, but that didn't mean that all of a sudden I was off limits to Satan. In fact, I think sometimes when you accept Christ as your Savior, your awareness and the intensity level goes up because, as I've said before, if Satan can't have your soul, he wants your testimony. And so he comes with these questions and he puts them in our mind, all with the same intent that he put the question in the mind of Eve, and that is to challenge God and to draw us away from him. But he always makes it a personal attack on me. So he said, you, referring to Eve. He personalized the question to Eve just like he personalizes the question to us. And then he added to the question, you must not, which was kind of like a dare or like a challenge. And Satan is always challenging the authority of God by coming to us and putting seeds of doubt in our mind. God's not faithful enough to deliver you from this circumstance. God doesn't have the resources to meet all your needs. God doesn't really care about you. There's so many people on the face of the earth. Why would God care about you? God doesn't really love you, because if he loved you, he wouldn't let you be experiencing this. All these questions and more are all intended to challenge God's relationship with us and our relationship with God, in the hope that by asking that question, it would be used like a wedge being driven into a piece of wood by a maul in order to split us apart and to do us irreparable harm. He goes on, he says, you must not, and then he puts in the word eat. The word eat. You know, it appeals to just one of the basic natures of humanity. The desire to have food, the desire not to be hungry, the desire to be able to know that the basic need in our life is met. And Satan used what was the most attractive thing in the garden that day to appeal to Eve. And he appealed not only to her emotional sense, he challenged her spiritual relationship, but he also challenged her physical relationship. There's no area that's left untouched by Satan when it comes to asking questions that are intended to drive a wedge between you and me, whether it's in our physical existence, our spiritual existence, or in our emotional state of mind. There is no question that's off limits to Satan if he can achieve the goal of driving a wedge between you and me. And then he went on, he said, from any tree. There were a lot of choices in the garden that day. There were a lot of opportunities. But Satan came to one specific tree, and it was one that God told Adam and Eve, you cannot touch this tree. He didn't tell them why they couldn't touch this tree necessarily. He just gave them the commission that says, don't touch this tree. Now, he did say, or you will surely die, but he didn't go into great details. He just gave them a directive. And when Satan asked the question of Eve, it was a direct challenge to the directive that God had given her and given to Adam as well. And when Satan asks us a question, that's often the case. He goes and drives a wedge between us and God by challenging the directives that God gives you and me from his word as to how we ought to live. Because Satan knows that if he can get our thought processes churning and he can get us to thinking about that question, the longer we think about it, the further away from God. So how should we handle questions when Satan answers us? I'm going to go back to what Jesus did that we looked at a few days ago before the crucifixion, before Easter. Remember when he was standing before Pilate, and Pilate asked him a question, and some of the others asked him a question? He only responded to the questions when he had to respond to telling the truth. But all those other questions that were intended to mislead him, to trip him up, and to take him away from his strength and his relationship with God, how did he answer those questions? He answered them with silence. My advice to us today is that when Satan comes to us and he asks us a question, don't feel compelled to answer it, because beyond that question is another question, and another question, and another question, and they're all intended to lead you away from God and ultimately to sin. Silence Satan by not giving him an answer, and just turn to God. And instead of carrying on a conversation with answering questions that Satan puts in your mind, start a conversation with God. And if nothing else, tell Satan like Jesus did, "Get thee behind me." Hope you have a great day.